So we want diverse teams, but how do we lead them, build them, and create an environment to fully appreciate diverse experiences and backgrounds? I'm Meghana, President of Diversity and Engineering, and today I'll be sharing with you 5 tips to harness the diversity on your teams to be more effective, innovative, and financially prosperous. Now, some quick context. I created Diversity and Engineering as a means to support underrepresented groups in STEM, and a belief that fuels our work is the recognition of the inherent power of diversity in solving complex global issues. But before I share my 5 tips with you, I want you all to take just a quick second to think about the traits that make you, you. For example, I'm a woman, an engineer, I'm super clumsy, the list goes on for all of us. But when these traits are combined, we are more than the sum of our parts, and we have perspectives that are unique to our experiences and to our backgrounds. And when these perspectives are harnessed on a team, teams are at their fullest innovative potential. So let's get started with the first tip. Do your research. I encourage people to start learning definitions of words that may seem unfamiliar to them but are super relevant to other people. For example, equity versus equality, microaggressions. The more knowledge you have, the better you can understand different perspectives on your team. As an example, let's talk about microaggressions. A microaggression is a statement that perpetuates stereotypes about marginalized groups. They're often compared to mosquito bites because they're small annoyances that build up to be a really big problem. You've heard them before, things like, "You don't look like an engineer," or "Your English is so good." Now, read between the lines. To the untrained ear, a microaggression may seem like, just a comment or a joke, but telling someone that they don't look like an engineer implies that they don't fit in, that they're different. But without knowledge of the concept of microaggressions, it might be hard to recognize them when they come up in a conversation. So sometimes it's hard to see things through other people's eyes, but it's not always fair to ask others to teach us about their experiences. Do your own research to familiarize yourself with concepts that you don't know about, because it's an important step in understanding and recognizing non-inclusive behaviors. Now, on to the second tip. Lead by example. In tip 1, we talked about doing our research and building up a vocabulary, but how do we integrate this new knowledge into our team practices? I have 3 methods, which I'm going to explain again using the example of microaggressions. So my first method is to set an example on your team. In the case of microaggressions, it's a lot easier to avoid this language altogether than to try to press undo or Control Z in the middle of a conversation. So before making a statement, ask yourself whether it stereotypes, assumes, or labels a group or makes them feel uncomfortable because of their identity. If the answer is yes, it's probably better left unsaid because it's probably not the most productive statement. The next one is to acknowledge mistakes. For example, let's say someone says that you've made them uncomfortable because of a statement. Well, acknowledge the occurrence and be vocal about the fact that you said something that was uninclusive, and then do your research to understand the implications and the nuances of what you said. And then finally, apologize genuinely and be open to feedback. And my last method is to, whenever appropriate, call people in by educating them with kindness as opposed to calling them out. For example, if you're the target of a microaggression, a simple way to point it out is to ask, "Hey, what did you mean by that?" This forces someone to rethink their statement, and it saves you time and energy from having to explain. Okay, so we're doing our research, we're leading by example, and we're trying to be super progressive. Great, but how do we build a diverse team? For my third tip, we have to acknowledge diversity without limiting people to one part of their identity. So that starts with acknowledging people, being allies, and avoiding tokenizing them. So when you see someone, a little voice may pop into your head and place them into a neat little box, which is something that we do with stereotypical traits. Media does this a lot. Take, for example, the black guy, the immigrant, the woman. Maybe you even did this when you saw me up here. That little voice is what you're socialized to think about someone. It tokenizes them and reduces them to one identity. For example, when I Google CEO stock photo, I get images of these guys, and the little voice in my head tells me that they look like CEOs, but really I know nothing about them. And when I question this little voice in my head, I don't even know their qualifications or who they are. Now, I want you to take a second and look at these 2 folks. Who would you choose to be your CEO? True allyship begins when you start questioning how and why you categorize people. By doing that, you're combating tokenism and appreciating people for all of who they are, not just one part of their identity that fills a checkbox. My fourth tip. Have you ever heard the phrase, check your privilege? Now, privilege is the social dynamic where certain ways of being are normalized and deemed superior. And people are often said to have privilege when their identity fits what's called a societal norm, making them blind to the experience of other people who may not fit that societal norm. But what does that mean for our teams? Well, privilege allows the blindness of people to the experience of others. For example, how many of you had to check whether this building had accessible entrances? I didn't, because I have the privilege of not having a physical disability. How many of you feel lucky because you don't see race in your day-to-day interactions? Well, that's probably because race doesn't affect you in your day-to-day interactions. So right about now, it's really easy to feel guilty for having societal privilege. And that's okay, but if you feel guilty, don't make it about you. Feel it, recognize it, and do your research to figure out what you can do to use your privilege to amplify the voices of others and support people who don't have the same social privilege as you. Now, my last tip is the hardest for people. Be kind to yourself and nurture others. Take what you've learned here today from all the speakers and continue to challenge your traditional practices. The less you're afraid of change, the better that your teams will operate, guaranteed. And right about now, you might feel upset, guilty, enlightened, excited, sad. That means that you're growing. Question your team dynamics, but don't forget to nurture yourself and others in the process. We're all human, we're all flawed. We take time and experience to learn and grow, and today I've asked you to unlearn. So be kind to yourself and to others as you do so. Thank you.